After being abandoned by my mother at 16, so she could focus on her new husband and kids, I built a life on my own, became the CEO of a successful software company, and now, after 16 years of silence, she suddenly reappeared demanding $50,000 a year to fund my step-siblings' college tuition. Approximately $25,000 each, annually, my mother declared. I owe you nothing, I countered. 3 months subsequent, my stepsister requested a personal audience. Now 32, my tale truly commences at age 16, when my reality shattered. Today, I head my own software development firm, with 30 staff across 3 city locations. I have, brick by painful brick, forged a life of which I am genuinely proud. Never did I anticipate my mother's reappearance after 16 years of quietude, especially not to solicit vast sums for the offspring she prioritized over me. Until my 12th year, it was merely my mother, Victoria, and I in a confined 2-bedroom dwelling. Funds were tight, yet we possessed one another. My mother maintained 2 employments to sustain us, and I quickly adapted to independence. I prepared plain dishes, completed my assignments unprompted, and endeavored to be the most agreeable child imaginable. I recognized her immense efforts and cherished her deeply for them. Everything shifted when she encountered Robert. He held stable employment as a construction manager, owned his residence, and drove a new utility vehicle. He appeared agreeable enough initially, though he never truly sought connection with me. I held cautious optimism that our lives might improve. 6 months after their courtship began, my mother announced their impending marriage, and we relocated to Robert's abode. A month after the nuptials, Mom shared her pregnancy news. I was 13 then, and while a flicker of apprehension stirred, I attempted to feel joy for her. She radiated enthusiasm, decorating the nursery and conversing incessantly about the impending arrival. Robert became more present, more engaged, but never with me. His gaze would bypass me at the dinner table, as if I were inanimate furniture rather than a person. The first discernible alteration came when my mother ceased attending my school functions, my band concert, my debate team finals. She was overly fatigued from the pregnancy. I comprehended, or tried to, but when Robert complained about the expense of my school activities, suggesting they were an unnecessary outlay with a baby on the way, my mother did not advocate for me. She merely gazed down at her enlarged abdomen and changed the topic. Grace arrived when I was 14, a colicky, high-needs infant who consumed every ounce of my mother's attention. I contributed, learning to change diapers and warm bottles, hoping to alleviate her weariness and perhaps regain some of her focus. Instead, Robert began commenting on the cost of maintaining a non-biological child. My mother never challenged his assertions. When I was 15, my mother announced she was expecting once more. By then, I was employed on weekends at a neighborhood grocery shop, utilizing my income for my own clothing and academic supplies. I contributed half my wages to assist with household expenses, thinking it might make Robert perceive me as less of an imposition. It did not. Jackson arrived just before my 16th birthday. We had relocated to a larger dwelling by then, but somehow I ended up with the smallest bedroom, little more than a converted office space. My old furnishings proved incompatible, so I slept on a futon while Grace and Jackson received coordinated bedroom suites for their spacious rooms. When I highlighted the imbalance, my mother told me I ought to express gratitude for simply having my own space. The crucial moment came 3 months after Jackson's birth. I inadvertently listened as Robert told my mother they should utilize my educational savings, funds my grandparents had been accumulating since my infancy, for a culinary space refurbishment. Something inside me cracked at her nonchalant disregard for my prospects. When I confronted her, her gaze became rigid in a way I had never witnessed. "You have never been grateful for anything Robert has done for you," she stated, her voice toneless. "He is right about you." 2 weeks later, they sat me down for what they termed a family meeting. Robert conducted the majority of the discourse, explaining the cost of rearing 3 children, how the infants required greater room and provisions. "You are virtually mature now," he pronounced while my mother stared at the kitchen table. "You need to cultivate self-reliance." My mother finally raised her gaze. "We have conversed with your grandparents. They have assented to provide you accommodation. We need to concentrate on Grace and Jackson now. They are young and require greater parental presence." I had a fortnight to gather my belongings and depart the sole residence I had inhabited for the past 4 years. My grandparents, my biological father's parents, were astonished by my communication. They had been informed I was experiencing difficulty adapting and needed a setting with greater discipline. The reality rendered them wordless. Within hours, they had made arrangements for my retrieval that weekend, disinclined to permit my continued stay in that house any unnecessary duration. My paternal Aunt Sophia, my father's sister, traveled 5 hours by car to assist with my move. She wept upon observing how minimal cartons held my possessions. My mother kept her removed during the relocation, offering empty truisms about how this was for the best, and I would grasp in due course. Robert made no pretense of remorse. He transported my futon bed to the truck with thinly veiled contentment. The day I left, my mother embraced me formally and stated she would contact me promptly. She never did. My grandparents embraced me warmly, with sincere affection, but the transition proved harsh. I experienced recurring distressing dreams for months, re-experiencing the instance my mother chose her new family over me. I immersed myself in academic pursuits and my job at the neighborhood hardware shop, resolved to minimize financial assistance required. My grandparents affirmed their commitment to cover my essentials, but I managed all other expenses, accumulating funds for university as able. Counseling aided my assimilation of the desertion, though the scar never completely vanished. My therapist helped me comprehend that my mother's choices mirrored her shortcomings, not a measure of my value. Slowly, I reconstructed my personal identity. My grandparents and paternal Aunt Sophia became my bedrock, showing me what true, selfless affection manifested itself as. I completed secondary education among the highest achievers and secured a partial academic grant to a public university pursuing computer science. I maintained 30 hours of weekly employment throughout college, enrolling in summer courses for accelerated graduation. My academic instructors became guides impressed by my ambition. One facilitated an internship opportunity that evolved into my initial professional role after graduation. I progressed rapidly, dedicating more time than my peers and undertaking undesirable assignments. By 25, I was heading a development cohort. By 27, I possessed sufficient professional networks and accumulated funds to establish my own enterprise. The venture surpassed my anticipations, expanding from 3 personnel to 30 in just 2 years. Throughout those 16 years, I experienced no communication from my mother or Robert. Via distant relatives, I sporadically learned of developments concerning Grace and Jackson, their academic accomplishments, their avocations, their seeming contentment. I experienced merely a mild interest, like hearing about remote family members rather than step-siblings. Then, on a typical Tuesday, an electronic message appeared from a contact I had not encountered for 16 years. Victoria Martin at email.com. The topic header stated plainly, reconnecting. The communication was unusually informal, as if we had merely drifted apart rather than her outright desertion. She alluded to my commercial achievements and stated she had familial concerns requiring deliberation. She proposed a coffee rendezvous that weekend. I gazed at the display for nearly an hour, feelings swirling within me intensely, curiosity, anger, a naive glimmer of optimism. I transmitted the message to my counselor, who suggested resolution could arise from her disclosures, contingent on our meeting under my conditions in an accessible location, with defined limits. After 3 days of inner deliberation, I replied with a concise acceptance to meet at a cafe adjacent to my workplace, in partial ground, where I could depart readily if required. Encountering her after 16 years felt dreamlike. She had considerably aged, her once raven locks now threaded with silver, creases marring her complexion that had not been there previously. Robert sat beside her, stouter and more assertive than I remembered, his visage wary. I had anticipated a surge of sentiment, but instead discovered an odd aloofness, as if I were meeting remote associates rather than the person who bore me. My mother embraced me stiffly while Robert offered a formal handshake. They remarked upon my healthy appearance, how astonished they were by my achievements. My mother conversed as if our parting was a joint choice, a typical emancipation of a self-reliant offspring rather than a distressing desertion. After 15 minutes of superficial discussion about the weather and local news, my mother ultimately disclosed the objective of our gathering. Your sibling pair is commencing university education next year, she stated, her voice adopting a more recognizable cadence, the manner of speaking she employed when soliciting assistance from acquaintances. Grace gained admission to Cornell, and Jackson will attend NYU. We are immensely proud. Robert inclined his posture. University education is currently expensive. The accommodation costs at these institutions are exorbitant. We have learned of your prosperity, my mother continued, her gaze avoiding direct contact with mine. The enterprise is performing quite strongly from what we understand. I kept quiet, observing the scene develop. We consider it merely equitable you assist with their educational fees, she finally stated. They're your kinfolk, after all, and relative support kin. Robert assented emphatically. We require roughly $25,000 annually per individual. We will need the initial remittance by August. The impudence rendered me momentarily speechless. 16 years devoid of any communication, note, or celebratory greeting. 16 years of reconstructing my existence from the debris of their refusal. And now they sat before me, not with apologies or remorse, but with open palms, anticipating sums in the tens of thousands. Allow me to confirm my comprehension. I articulated precisely. You wish me to contribute $50,000 yearly for the university instruction of siblings I have not encountered since their infancy? My mother's grin wavered. Their family, your brother and sister. My apologies, but I shall not be undertaking that, I responded, my tone firm despite the rising fury within me. Her demeanor transformed from hopeful to disbelieving. Subsequent to all our efforts for you, the preposterousness of her declaration could have provoked laughter had it not been so hurtful. Precisely what did you provide me? Discard me when I proved bothersome? I nurtured you for 16 years, she whispered sharply, shedding the amicable guise. Is this the manner in which you compensate me? I am indebted to you for naught, I uttered softly. I owe them utterly nothing. Robert's countenance contorted. You unappreciative small child. Our discussion concludes here, I believe. I cut in, rising to depart. My mother seized my wrist, her digits gripping with unexpected force. Assist your siblings, or you cease to exist for me. I softly, yet resolutely detached her grip. You rendered me non-existent to you 16 years prior, upon prioritizing them above me. Her shriek reverberated throughout the cafe as I proceeded towards the exit. What audacity! Following all our renunciations, your esteemed company would not exist had I not instilled a strong work ethic in you. Patrons swiveled to gaze as Robert attempted to calm her, his own visage twisted in fury. The proprietor approached their seating area, apprehension visible in his demeanor. I departed without a backward glance, but the encounter was far from concluded. By that evening, my device was inundated with messages and voice calls from both of them, fluctuating between emotional manipulation and intimidation. They located my corporate email and online presence, transmitting communications that grew progressively aggressive when I failed to reply. The vexation intensified during the subsequent fortnight. They appeared at my workplace unannounced, creating a disturbance in the reception area until protective services removed them. They reached out to distant relatives with concocted narratives about my declining to aid my impoverished relatives. They even contacted my grandparents, who swiftly blocked their contact information upon learning of their requests. When they commenced reaching my clients via LinkedIn, asserting I was deceitfully harming my own kin, my patience had run out. I sought advice from legal counsel, who recorded the recurring instances of persecution and assisted me in submitting a request for a protective order. We dispatched a legal notice to halt activity, which they disregarded, persisting in their vexatious campaign with apparently no concern about prospective repercussions. The judicial proceeding was scheduled for an early June Tuesday morning. I attended with my lawyer and a dossier replete with proof. Digital captures of communications, surveillance video from my workplace, sworn declarations from staff who had observed their unruly conduct. My mother and Robert appeared unrepresented by legal counsel, seemingly assured of the validity of their stance. When the magistrate requested an explanation for their conduct, my mother initiated a tearful discourse about guardianship entitlements and familial duties. She asserted my desertion years prior, severing ties due to adolescent insubordination. Robert affirmed gravely alongside her, sometimes contributing particulars to her fabricated account. My legal representatives systematically deconstructed their tale, exhibiting the records of their torment along with a sworn statement from my grandparents and paternal aunt outlining the conditions of my displacement from their residence. The magistrate's countenance became progressively concerned as the reality surfaced. Therefore, to elucidate, the judge stated, speaking to my mother, you requested your offspring depart your dwelling at 16, maintained no communication for 16 years, and subsequently anticipated monetary aid for your other children's schooling? My mother's tearful assurance faltered beneath his disbelieving stare. He has attained success now. He possesses the means to assist his relatives. Ms. Martin, the magistrate responded, legal statutes do not acknowledge a duty for siblings to provide mutual financial backing, especially given these conditions. The protective injunction was issued, forbidding their communication with me or any individual linked to my enterprise for a duration of 3 years. Upon the magistrate's pronouncement of his ruling, my mother's visage collapsed in dismay and abasement. In all my acquaintance with him, Robert appeared fearful for the initial occasion. The repercussions spread through our wider kin. Certain family members reproached me for my lack of clemency, proposing I ought to display greater magnanimity despite the vexation. Others conveyed their backing, having observed my mother's conduct across the years. My grandparents and paternal Aunt Sophia remained steadfastly supportive, gratified by my safeguarding the existence I had constructed. 3 months following the court session, an unforeseen electronic mail appeared. The originator was Grace Martin, 998 at email.com, with a topic header, May we converse? The communication was succinct and hesitant. You are unacquainted with me, yet I am your sibling. I would appreciate a meeting, if you are amenable. No mother, no father, solely me. I comprehend if you decline. I conferred with my counselor once more, wary of re-exposing old injuries or subjecting myself to additional exploitation. Following thorough deliberation, I consented to encounter Grace at a communal park the subsequent weekend. She was elevated and slight with my mother's dark tresses and an anxious grin. She instantly noticed me, advancing with tentative strides. We took a seat on a bench beside a modest water feature. Uncomfortable quietude extending between us until she eventually articulated, "I discovered their actions towards you." The authentic account, not their rendition. She elaborated that she uncovered correspondence from my grandparents within the attic while searching for aged photographs, communication that opposed all she had been informed concerning my exit. Challenging our parents resulted in a heated dispute where the reality ultimately surfaced. "I regret their past actions," she uttered gently, "and for their recent attempts." Diverging from Jackson, who had aligned with our parents in their sense of deservingness, Grace was appalled by their conduct and presumptions. She had relocated from their dwelling, securing cohabitance and employment for self-sustenance while pursuing education at a local college instead of Cornell. "I do not desire their assistance if it entails such conditions," she clarified. "And I absolutely did not wish for aid extracted from you." Through the ensuing months, Grace and I forged a circumspect connection based on reciprocal esteem, not duty. I assisted her with employment requests and scholastic guidance, but provided no monetary aid beyond infrequent shared beverages and repasts. She never requested further, comprehending the limits essential for our delicate bond to develop. 6 months following the issuance of the protective directive, I learned through relatives that my mother and Robert had been informing others I had deserted the family subsequent to achieving prosperity, seemingly intending to redeem their standing. Grace conveyed they had disowned her when she declined to cease meeting me, appending her to the roster of offspring they cast aside when opportune. By the first anniversary of our renewed connection, Grace had moved to a public university with a partial scholarship, preserving her autonomy whilst continuing her studies. We had established a pleasant routine of monthly meals and consistent messages, cultivating the type of bond that ought to have materialized years prior. My grandparents were at first hesitant about Grace, safeguarding me after all that had transpired. Yet her sincere contrition for our parents' deeds and her resolve to carve her unique trajectory ultimately swayed them. Observing their acceptance of her into their residence for a Thanksgiving feast brought an unforeseen feeling of restoration. Jackson stayed in agreement with our parents, sporadically dispatching aggressive communications to Grace concerning her disloyalty. She conveyed some of these to me, disclosing the detrimental atmosphere I had departed years before. Any culpability I might have retained for abstaining from assisting his schooling dissipated upon perusing his self-important, furious remarks. The encounter strengthened insights gained from years of counseling and reconstruction. Kinship is not determined by lineage or duty. It is established through esteem, assistance, and authentic concern. My mother never grasped that basic reality, perceiving connections solely from the perspective of personal advantage. I am uncertain if I will ever completely recover from being cast aside by the individual who ought to have cherished me most without reserve. However, I have constructed an existence populated by individuals who elect to support me, not due to duty or monetary gain, but owing to my inherent self. My enterprise continues to flourish. My bond with my grandparents and paternal aunt strengthens annually. And now, surprisingly, I possess a sister who prioritized principle above ease. Certain individuals have intimated I ought to feel self-satisfied regarding my prosperity in contrast to my mother's anticipations. The reality is I do not. There is no contentment in witnessing an individual expose their deepest flaws, particularly someone you once held profound affection for. Yet, there is deep tranquility in recognizing I disrupted the pattern of conditional affection that characterized my formative years, establishing limits that safeguard the life and connections I have diligently forged. My mother instructed me on the antithesis of kinship. Paradoxically, that agonizing instruction aided my appreciation and valuation of what kinship truly signifies, a sphere of reciprocal regard and sincere solicitude that requires no judicial mandates or legal menaces for its preservation. For that endowment, I presume I ought to be appreciative, ultimately.